you've sat down with the New South Wales Premier as well, Dominic Perrottet.
Yes, Premier Perrottet has raised concerns this summit is too much about meeting union demands around wage rises and not enough about the screaming labour shortages that are out there, businesses that cannot find enough workers. I spoke with the New South Wales Premier a short time ago on the sidelines of the summit concerning the Jobs Summit, his own industrial problems in New South Wales and the prospect of no body, no parole laws in the wake of the Chris Dawson case. Dominic Perrottet, thanks for joining us. This is what you wrote in The Australian this morning. You said the big love-in between unions and business has dominated the lead up to the Jobs and Skills Summit, but the summit is at serious risk of looking out of touch because the single most urgent skills issue in our nation right now is the severe shortage of employees. Is this summit a waste of time?
Not at all. I think it's important that employer groups have a good relationship with unions, and that's positive. But let's not lose sight of why we're here and what are the immediate terms and needs in front of us. And at the moment, if you go around the state of New South Wales or anywhere else in this country, the biggest issue is labour shortages, skill shortages. We need short-term solutions and also medium to long-term plans to drive productivity growth, and that's what I want to get out of the summit.
Well, a lot of it has been focused on IR though, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think too much. If you ask small business owners who have closed their cafes because they can't get workers in, if you look at in the agricultural sector, we have fruit falling on the ground right across regional New South Wales because we can't get the pickers in. So we need solutions, not motherhood statements. But I think, I'm confident based on National Cabinet yesterday that we'll get some strong resolutions in relation to short-term solutions, but also we need to look to medium to long-term plans as well.
Well, just on that, Are they talking about a certain number of migrants or a change to the visas or anything of that nature that will get workers in?
So I think firstly is obviously getting through the backlog of visa applications, of which there are many. And the second point in relation to that is...
Have they told you how many?
I don't know how many, but there's a lot, and the feedback you receive on the ground from the community, from the business community particularly, is that the backlog is way too high. Now, they've addressed that in terms of allocating further resources. That's important, but it's not just the backlog. We need to actually look forward and provide greater avenues for those areas where there are skill shortages to get to permanent residency. We want Australia to be an attractive place for people to come.
Is the PM saying he'll do that then?
I'm pretty confident that should be an outcome of the summit.
The announcement of 180,000 new fee-free TAFE places, will that make a difference, and have you got enough TAFE teachers to teach them?
Yes, we do, and we've also got a number of fee-free places in New South Wales, so this will complement what we have. But once again, Andrew, this has to be targeted on those areas where we need to develop skills. I think there's a real opportunity at a Commonwealth and state level now to identify the opportunities and the skill development that we want to focus on as a state and as a nation, and then drive people into those areas and help them with their studies in relation to that.
Does the IR thing feel like a bit of a stitch-up? I mean, the previous coalition government couldn't get changes to the Better Off Overall test through?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. They couldn't get changes through, so it's interesting, the developments. But look, I don't have an issue, and I think it's important that if you can get resolution on a lot of these matters between employers and unions, that is positive. But let's not lose sight of the main issue that's in front of us today, and that is after 2 years of closed borders, we have enormous skill shortages and labour shortages right across the board. In New South Wales, whether you look at the infrastructure, hospitality, agriculture, and then if you move across to public service, teaching, nursing, these are areas which we're all struggling with that we need to address. That is paramount, and that should be the focus of the summit.
Are your big infrastructure projects being delayed by years because of the skill shortages?
Well, we know there has been delays mainly due to the pandemic, and we've pushed out our infrastructure agenda slightly, and that's also because of escalation of costs of infrastructure projects. Plus, to your question, labour costs. With labour shortages, labour costs are increasing, and that's putting pressure. But it's also a global competition for workers.
All right. Put simply, if there's inflation of 6 to 7%. Why shouldn't people get wage rises of 6 to 7%?
In the public sector?
Everywhere.
Well, that's a challenge because obviously businesses have their own costs they've got to meet as well. There are fixed costs that businesses have that go with that. Wages is obviously one component. we know that.
Well, what's a fair wage rise, given the conditions?
Well, here in New South Wales, from a public sector perspective, we've had public sector wages at around 3%, but that's also been above the private sector wage position for the last 10 years. Now, and importantly, Andrew, above inflation. We've been paying above inflation in New South Wales. We believe, as well as the largest employer.
What, previous to this year, you mean?
Previous to this year, yes, our public sector wages have been higher than inflation.
But now they're half inflation.
And I accept that. But at 3%, we're still higher than the private sector. And in addition to that, as the largest employer in the state, public sector wage growth can help drive private sector wage growth, and that's why we've led the way over the last 10 years in that space. We've done incredibly well during the pandemic. There are also positives to come from this. We've got an unemployment rate at 3.3%. It's the lowest in recorded history in New South Wales. That's incredibly positive. We've got more people in work than ever before. If you asked me a year and a half ago, would we have an unemployment rate where it is when we're in the middle of the pandemic, when we'd lost 150,000 jobs? I wouldn't have believed that.
Sure.
Now, so I think we've got a lot as well. I know that we're in difficult economic times, but I think we've also got a lot to be grateful for in terms of where we sit as a state and a country.
Let me ask you about these industrial troubles you've been having now.
Yeah.
You seem to be making a bit of a moral argument out of it. People just want the trains to run. They just want the buses to run. They just want their hospitals to be staffed. Why can't you fix it?
That's been my focus the entire time, Andrew.
Well, how come it's taken so long? What's the issue?
In relation to what?
Well, the rail strike, for example.
Well, we've been acting in good faith. We've provided concession after concession after concession to the union, including modifying perfectly good state-of-the-art trains to the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's not my money, it's taxpayers' money. But when it got to the course of the last week, when trains aren't being run for circumstances where there's simply a scratch on a window or graffiti, to have on the course of the weekend negotiations falling down when I agreed that we would immediately modify the inner city fleet, and then to see what occurred yesterday was incredibly disappointing. And I had to draw a line in the sand in order to get this issue resolved.
You're not the first New South Wales government to cop trouble from the rail union. So what is it about this dispute that you can't fix it?
Well, because they won't agree to conditions in relation to the wage cap that's in place. We've made a number of concessions, and what I've said today is that the EA will be put to the union. They'll need to put that to their members, and they need to vote on it.
And will they do that?
They have to.
And what happens if that gets voted down?
Well, then, if that gets voted down, then we will seek to terminate the current agreement in the Fair Work Commission.
And then what happens in terms of the dispute?
Well, we would seek to have this resolved independently through the Fair Work Commission, and we think that is a fair and reasonable approach.
How long could that drag on for?
Well, as long as there's no industrial action, then it doesn't matter if it takes time. And I think the union should. What the union.
And that's what would occur. There'd be an order for no industrial action.
Well, we would seek that.
Would you get it?
Well, that's a matter for the courts, Andrew. But what's in my interest is making sure we have those trains, the new intercity fleet, on the tracks as quickly as possible, because they're state-of-the-art technology to serve the people of our state, and ultimately we have services operating at full capacity so people can get to work and kids can get to school. That's my focus, and that's been, and to the question, my focus through this entire time has been to work collaboratively to get the outcome. What I have seen now, particularly over the last week, has been behaviour that falls short of those expectations, that inconveniences people across the state, and we've had to take the action we have.
What's going on with the nurses dispute?
Well, obviously we've made a decision in relation to wages at 3% and 3.5%. We also provided a bonus payment of $3,000 for nurses.
And it's not good enough for them?
Well, I'd make this point, Andrew. I mean, if you go around the country right now, we know that every health system is under pressure. We've gone through a pandemic. There are staff shortages. I announced with Dan Andrews in Victoria this week, both states stepping up to provide urgent care clinics. Now, that's in the Commonwealth's responsibility. But these are issues that need to be tackled. We talked about the Job Summit here today. We have a health system in this country where a state system runs against the federal system. They do not work together. And we're seeing significant increases in emergency presentations right across the country. because of a lack of access to GPs. So we're happy to step in and provide financial support to get these clinics up and running. But I think long term, we need to have a fair dinkum discussion about health reform. And if we can't go through a 1 in 100 year pandemic and look at how do we resolve better health systems in this country and financial arrangements associated with it, then we never will.
Have you spoken to the PM about that?
I've constantly spoken about health reform.
Is he into it?
Well, I think the important point from this week was the demonstration from the Victorian Premier, Dan Andrews, and myself, that we're happy to step up and put financial support in here in an area that's in the Commonwealth space, because we're not coming with our hand out asking for a bucket of cash. We're coming with financial support to get a better system underway. But I'd make the point, Andrew, if you look at the industrial action that's occurring in New South Wales, it's not occurring anywhere else in the country where there's Labor governments, in circumstances where our wages policy leads the nation. So
I was going to ask you about that. There's a belief in your government that it's deliberately targeted to help you lose the election. Do you believe that?
Well, it's not for me to make political assessments. My job is to do what's right for our people. But I do question the fact that we've got at every level, we've had a union that came out at the start of the year and said it's going to be the year of the strike. On wages and conditions, we have the wages policy in New South Wales leads the nation, yet they're not striking in any other state. I think people can make up their own mind.
But if this is sabotage, which you seem to indicate that it could be, politically motivated sabotage, as well as trying to get their members a pay rise, could it lose you the election?
Well, I don't think so. I'm focused on doing what's right for our people, and the decisions I've made, particularly, Andrew, in relation to the rail union more recently, I'm not making political decisions. I'm making decisions that are in the best interest of the people of our state.
Just a couple of quick ones to finish. This no body, no parole thing that Hedley Thomas has been calling for, will you consider it?
Yeah. I mean, currently it's a consideration that is made in relation to parole, but it's not mandatory that it is in other states. I've spoken to the Attorney General to get advice and a briefing on that. But
when do you expect that?
Next week.
Could it be legislated this year if you did it?
But well, I'll get the advice in relation to that. But it certainly makes sense. I mean, if it's not, it wouldn't be a unique approach. It's already the approach that's taken in other jurisdictions. It's currently a consideration that is made in relation to the granting of parole, and it certainly makes sense to me.
And just finally, what's your view of the stage 3 tax cuts? Whether people should get them, whether it creates a better tax system, and what it means for the economy?
Well, I do believe in tax cuts. I believe in higher wages and lower taxes. So they're commitments that have been made, and I think they should be supported going forward.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.